The Israel Defense Forces is conducting limited and targeted raids along Israel's northern border against the threat Hezbollah poses to civilians in northern Israel. These localized ground raids will target Hezbollah strongholds that threaten Israeli towns, kibbutzim, and communities along our border.
The Israeli military announced early Tuesday morning that its troops had begun crossing into southern Lebanon. This is the first time that the Israeli army is going into a ground invasion of Lebanon since 2006. And it comes just 3 days after the killing of Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah in an Israeli airstrike in Beirut. The IDF issued a statement saying that they would destroy Hezbollah military infrastructure in villages close to the Israel-Lebanon border. In a statement that was issued shortly before 2 a.m., the military described the operation as a limited one. The IDF said that its troops had begun entering Lebanon a few hours ago in order to target sites that pose an immediate threat to Israeli communities in northern Israel. The invasion followed intense Israeli strikes across Lebanon over the past 2 weeks that have killed hundreds of people. According to the Lebanese Health Ministry, more than 1,000 Lebanese nationals have been killed. They do not distinguish between civilians and Hezbollah militants, counting all of them as Lebanese citizens. It started with the pager attacks in Beirut 2 weeks ago, in which a number of Hezbollah commanders were targeted. And it culminated last week with the killing of the leader of this terror group, Hassan Nasrallah. With this ground invasion, Israel is trying to force a conclusion to this war with Hezbollah, which started almost in parallel with Israel's war with Hamas in Gaza. The Gaza war is now closing in on its first-year anniversary. It was set off by the October 7th terror attacks on southern Israel last year, in which over 1,000 Israelis were killed and over 240 taken hostage. More than 100 of them are still in Hamas captivity. And right from the opening days of this war, Hezbollah started firing towards Israel and its positions in northern Israel in solidarity with Hamas. Both Hamas and Hezbollah are backed by Iran. 3 Israeli officials said that the invasion plan involved operating in a narrow strip of land that lines the northern side of the border between Israel and Lebanon. The last time Israel invaded Lebanon, it managed to push Hezbollah back north of the Litani River. That war ended with a UN-brokered ceasefire, which included Resolution 1701, which said that Hezbollah would vacate the land between the river and the northern Israeli border. The current invasion force consisted of small groups of commandos who were accompanied by air cover as well as artillery shells that are being fired from Israel. While for the time being it is intended to keep it as a limited operation, the plan could yet evolve into a much larger invasion. Thousands of additional troops have been deployed in northern Israel just in the last few days, and that has led to speculation about a broader, more prolonged operation. The invasion plan was approved in a late-night cabinet meeting shortly after the Israeli military declared a closed military zone in 3 villages which are at the northern tip of Israel. These include the villages from where thousands of Israeli civilians have had to flee in the past year since the war in Gaza began. The properties here have been badly damaged through a year of shelling and rocket fire from Hezbollah based in Lebanon. Earlier in that day, on Tuesday, a reporter for the New York Times saw at least 24 military Humvees, or armored personnel carriers, heading towards the same area. They were carrying troops who were in full combat gear. They even had night vision goggles with them. Dozens of logistical trucks, some of them armored trucks, were also headed to that same direction in the north. Intense explosions could also be heard close to the border late Monday, according to at least 2 of the residents who had not evacuated the area. The invasion plan followed days of smaller and brief cross-border reconnaissance missions in which Israeli commandos prepared for the larger incursion. Israel's official war aim is to make northern Israel safe enough for the return of tens of thousands who've been displaced to return home after nearly a year of rocket fire from Lebanon. According to the Israeli government, there are about 60,000 northern Israelis who have been displaced from their homes since the war between Israel and Hamas began. Hundreds of thousands of Lebanese civilians have also been displaced by Israeli fire, and more than 1,000 people, both civilians and combatants, have been killed by the Israeli airstrikes. And this limited ground operation is already having its impact far and wide, much further away from both Israel and Lebanon. More American forces are being rushed to the region. President Joe Biden of the United States says that he's sending a few thousand more troops to the Middle East, and this has been confirmed by the Pentagon Monday. Defense Department officials say the additional forces would bolster the security that is required for the 40,000 American troops who are already in the region, and they will help with the defense of Israel.
Can an all-out war in the Middle East be avoided? It has to be. We really have to avoid it. We've already taken precautions relative to our embassies and personnel who want to leave, but we're not there yet, but we're working like hell with the French and many others to take it away.
America is also sending additional fighter jets and ships to the already volatile region. But both the movement of personnel as well as the warships and the additional fighter jets is a signal to Tehran not to escalate matters further. Just ahead of the invasion, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu released an English-language video aimed at the Iranian public. In that video, he's heard saying, and I quote, "The people of Iran should know Israel stands with you." He also reiterated his threats against the Iranian government, saying, and again I quote, "There is nowhere that we will not go to protect our people and protect our country," unquote. This was, of course, seen as a veiled threat that if it came down to it, then Israel would not mind opening a direct line of attack against Tehran. Never mind the logistical and diplomatic difficulties involved in covering the over 2,000 kilometers that separate Tel Aviv and Tehran. Israel has used covert operations in the past to target Iranian military generals or even some of their nuclear scientists, but it has rarely ever used a long-range ballistic missile to target the Iranian population directly. Iran too has preferred to use its proxies like Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis in Yemen to target Israel rather than go for a direct line of attack. Even after the recent killing of Hassan Nasrallah, which is a body blow to Iran, the message from Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who is Iran's supreme leader, was that Israel will pay a heavy price before he retreated into a secret hiding location. That indicates that Iran would not want to get into a direct confrontation with Israel. The last time there was a direct confrontation between both Tel Aviv and Tehran was back in April of this year when Iran fired hundreds of drones into mainland Israel. But it left very little impact. Much of those drones and missiles were intercepted by Israel's world-class air defense systems. Neither side wants a wider regional war. At least that's what they say on the record. Both Israel and Iran could be playing for time. Israel wants to force a conclusion to this war with the ability to neuter both Hamas and Hezbollah at the same time. Israel would want to achieve this sooner than later, and certainly before the November elections in the United States. For Iran, the opposite holds true. It's playing the waiting game, realizing that with time, the asymmetry of power between Israel and Iran will only flatten out in favor of Iran. The one big improbable in this game of cat and mice is how close is Iran to developing a nuclear weapon. If Iran were to cross the nuclear Rubicon, it changes the very dynamic of the region and beyond. In fact, on Monday, the Russian Prime Minister was in Tehran right after the momentous events of the weekend when Israel confirmed Nasrallah's death. There is widespread speculation that Russia is providing Tehran with nuclear know-how in exchange for Iranian-made drones and missiles which have been deployed in the Ukraine war front. If, hypothetically speaking, Iran were to cross the nuclear Rubicon, then Israel's security would be threatened not just in the immediate term, but in the long term. And that means all bets are off.